This video is sponsored and brought to you by the dreamers that hang out on my live streams. Stay tuned to the end of the video to hear their names. If you want a chance to vote on what videos I release next, check out the Mr. X Dreams Discord server. Shadow people. I haven't spoken on these entities in quite a while, but I came across some new and unusual accounts in my archives recently. Did you know that although these enigmatic creatures, beings, sometimes are known for malicious intent, not all of them seem to wish harm on the humans that encounter them? Listen to these two stories and let me know your thoughts. Dear Mr. X, my name is Sam. I'm certainly no stranger to the idea that paranormal events may occur in this world, but I tend to take a rather conservative approach. Most of the time, when something strange happens, my first instinct is to find a logical, normal explanation to justify whatever I'm seeing. The story I'm about to share with you, though, no matter how hard I try, I can't seem to come up with a good explanation. Please let me know what you think. A few months after a stint in rehab, I moved into a nice apartment in a newish area of the city. Needless to say, I had some trouble with drugs before that. At the rehab place, I learned that rule number 1 of quitting any substance is to put some distance between yourself and anything and everyone involved with it. So I did, and I and my 2 cats, Rain and Aura, we left and started all over. I soon met some of my new neighbors. One family that had a set of twins. They were super friendly, very down-to-earth type of people. Despite being in a nicer area with wonderful neighbors, I was still habitual about locking the doors. It was second nature after having lived in so many sketchier parts of the city. My new place had a second bedroom I used as an office/game room. My computer was set up against the wall by the door. Through that door, you could see the living room and into the kitchen area. My cat Rain had set himself on a chair right outside the doorway and was happily snoring away. I had been in the house alone with my cats for quite some time. The deadbolts were locked up tight as usual. I was sitting at the computer in deep concentration, trying my best to learn about 3D modeling. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Rain abruptly sit up straight. His hair wasn't raised, so he didn't seem afraid. It was like he was intensely focused on something. I followed the direction of his gaze with my eyes, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, tall and sort of blocky, standing in my kitchen. It looked like the shadow of a man, but warped, almost shaped like a trapezoid. It moved slowly out of view for a second before re-emerging into my view and stopping in its tracks. What caught my attention was that the shadow didn't touch the floor or the ceiling. It seemed almost to be suspended between them. My cat Rain, wide-eyed, turned to look at me and then back at the figure. I could see the pure befuddlement in his eyes. My heart started racing, and I carefully stood up from my seat. My initial thought was that I didn't want to scare whatever it was I was staring at. I sort of laughed looking back at that. I, somehow, didn't want to scare it. I can't tell you any of the usual tidbits, like there wasn't a chill in the air or a foreboding feeling, because there really wasn't. It was as if I had seen a mythical creature by my blender, and I kinda wanted a selfie. After a few moments, I walked into the hallway to get a closer look. It just stood there, at least about 7 feet tall. It seemed to be staring right back at us. It was at this point that I noticed my inner voice was screaming at me like, "Are you seeing this? Are we actually seeing this?" I had time to blink several times before the shadowy entity darted out of the kitchen towards the front door, and that was when I felt it. A blast of air came through the house, enough to make me squint and pause for a moment before rounding the corner into the living room. I could see that somehow all the doors and windows were wide open. That is when I got a bit unnerved. I asked myself, did I leave them open? No, I've been here all day. What the hell? Upon walking around to lock up the house once again, I noticed some lights flashing in the parking lot and a few neighbors wandering around aimlessly outside. I soon found out that there had been a leak in the building, and the gas company was out in full force. Make of it what you will, but I don't believe all things that look frightening are necessarily there to harm us. Walking home the next evening, I looked up at the moon and saw it standing on the roof, the oddly shaped shadow man from my kitchen. I stared for a bit, watching him before giving him a little smile and a wave. I never saw him again after that. Story number 2. Hello, Mr. X. My name is Sally. I saw my first shadow person when I was about 6 years old. If my cousin Adrian hadn't witnessed it himself at the time, I don't think anyone would have ever believed me. I used to live out on a ranch in the country. My cousin and his parents lived just down the road, so we often spent the night at each other's houses. We were pretty far out of town, so our school friends really couldn't visit. He and I were pretty much always together. One Friday night, he stayed over at my house. We had made a plan to get up super early for Saturday morning cartoons. At the time, we lived in a single-wide trailer home with 2 bedrooms, so I shared the room with my older brother and sister. My sister and I had bunk beds, and my brother had his own. The room was a straight shot down the hallway at the end of the trailer. The way the bunks were set up, when the door was open, you could see the living room couch at the other end of the hall. There was a breakfast bar that divided the living room from the kitchen. That night, we both slept on the bottom bunk, which was my bed. We got up early as planned and were ready to bring on the sugary breakfast cereal and cartoons. It was only a few moments before we realized that we were actually up way too early. Where I lived, the cartoons started at 6 a.m. Well, the good ones did anyway. Upon figuring that out, we decided to just lay in the bed in the dark, joking around and laughing as quietly as possible, at the risk of waking up my angry teenage sister. After a few minutes, we turned around to check the time on the kitchen wall clock. What we saw was something unexpected. It was a tall, dark figure. It looked like it had the outline of a man, but we knew it wasn't my parents. We would have definitely heard either of them getting up or moving around in the trailer. Where it was standing, behind the bar, was near our kitchen sink. As I watched its movements closely, with its tall, slender frame hunched over the sink, it looked as if it was rummaging through our dishes. I couldn't see it very clearly against the already dimly lit room, but it appeared as if it was picking them up, examining the dishes closely, curiously, and then setting them back down. Now, this all happened over the course of less than a minute, but you know how time almost slows down when weird things are happening. My cousin Adrian whispered into my ear, Do you see that? What the heck is it? I don't know, I replied. As soon as I spoke those words, the thing stopped moving and turned around. I couldn't see any details or even the shape of a face, but somehow I knew for certain that it was looking right at us. The figure sort of seized up, as if he was extremely surprised, and continued to stare us down from across the hallway. After what seemed like several seconds, it suddenly ducked down and disappeared into the surrounding shadows. It was like it was more afraid of us than we were of it. We stayed there in shock for quite a while, trying to process what we just saw. We finally worked up the courage to get up and check the kitchen after a long round of "no, you first" back and forth. We walked down the hall, huddled closely together, making our way to the kitchen where it stood moments earlier. There was nothing there. To this day, you can put my cousin and I in separate rooms and he'll tell you the exact same as me. The only difference is, when he looked at it, he says he saw red eyes. I don't remember seeing those. Thankfully. I wouldn't want that image in my memories, to be honest. Anyway, thanks for listening, Mr. X. Sincerely, Sally. Hey there, my friends, Mr. X here. Now, it's a rare opportunity I get to share not one, but 2 stories where the entities involved are more helpful than horrifying. I do love a little pick-me-up once in a while. I hope you enjoyed these as much as I did. In Sam's story, I thought it was pretty interesting that she was unable to hear any of the windows or doors opening. I tend to believe her when she said she always keeps things in the house locked up, because I know how unsettling it is when you realize a door or window is open when you didn't mean it to be. If you weren't aware, when you live in a location that uses natural gas for heating and appliances and things like that. If there's a leak, it's actually possible for you to simply pass out and die if the gas builds up too much in your home. And there could even be explosions as a result of such scenarios. Many people are found deceased after succumbing to malfunctions like that. I believe it would be carbon monoxide poisoning, maybe. I'm not sure what the classification is or what the natural gas is that's used in different states or different places across the world. But that does happen. However, if someone were to fully ventilate that home, as I understand, that crisis could be averted. And it seems like the entity that was in her house might have been responsible for her all those things being open for that very reason, maybe to save her life. Very interesting idea. So, regarding Sally's story, a common theory on the existence of shadow people came to my mind as I was reading it. I have heard it postulated that when we perceive shadow people, or even in some cases ghosts or other strange entities for that matter, it might be possible that those creatures are existing in a parallel dimension of some sort, and they might actually be seeing us the way we see them, which might be a good explanation of why they sometimes appear to be startled or scared of us. Perhaps in some places where the fabric separating two realities just so happens to be a bit thinner, a little bit of each world sort of slips through and to be seen on the other side. So to put it simply, when we see a shadow person, they might be seeing us as a shadow person in their own world. It sort of explains a lot if you think about it that way. Interesting ideas to ponder. So, how about you? I want to know what you're thinking now. Do you think this shadow entity might have been responsible for ensuring Sam's safety on that day, where there was a gas leak? Why do you think the cat reacted by staring but not with fear or apprehensiveness? I personally am quite well assured that most cats could care less if their owner died from a gas leak, but maybe Little Rain was an exception to that. Who knows? Have you heard of shadow people seen with glowing eyes of any sort? That aspect of shadow stories, sometimes it makes me feel a little suspicious. I don't know, just kind of a weird thing that I don't hear very often. I also want to know what you think shadow people even are, to begin with, if you would acknowledge the existence of such things at all. So anyway, now I'm going to see what the dreamers have to say, those who are listening to the live stream as I read live. And don't forget, if you want a chance to have your question or comment appear in a video, or maybe even become a sponsor of an episode via Super Chats, turn on notifications so that you can get into the live readings and discussions as they happen. It's always a lot of fun. Alright, so first of all, we had some pretty good laughs in the comments during the live chat with this story. We had Cindy S. said, could you imagine asking a shadow person for a pic? Very, very awkward and silly mental image. I mean, there must have been next to no negative energy emanating from this being, if that's the first thought that entered Sam's head. Ambar Chavez says, please sir, would you stand still for a moment and say cheese? And Brett said, Mr. Shadow Person, would you strike a pose for me? LOL. Very comical scene there, and you all painted the picture very well. Lady Draco 87 says, I find it interesting that when people mention shadow people, they never say other features, other than it was solid black. Yeah, I wonder if that's just all that sticks in their mind. I mean, so is it solid lines, or is it cloudy, misty? Those are all good things to ask. Ambar also said, shadow people are whispers of the dimensions we are closest to, similar enough and close enough to intermingle. A fascinating idea, and one that I think about often, actually. Probably more often than the average person. Sans Seraph said, I feel like shadow people are pieces of a person left behind during their existence that just linger in our perception of reality. That is a sad fate, if I do say so myself. Imagine just a shattered, a fraction of your being left behind that's just conscious and aware enough to know where it's supposed to be. Say it's hangs around in its old apartment, the apartment that you used to live in, and doesn't know that it's supposed to have moved on. It doesn't really belong here anymore. Ray Ayanami says, I remember once when I was sleeping, something black hovered on my ceiling. It slowly formed into the shape of a human, but I could not see any facial features. Was it a shadow person? Yeah, that something transforming or moving or appearing as one form and then slowly turning into the shape of a human. I wouldn't assume that was a specific case of shadow person sighting. I haven't really heard a lot of stories with shadow people where they take some kind of amorphous form and then coagulate, if you will, into the form of a human. That's interesting. I should, if you can, Ray, do send me an email if there's anything more to that story. I'd like to hear more about it, or if that's happened to you more than once. Terico says, I wonder how cognizant of their appearance shadow people are. If they're surprised by being seen at all, are they aware of what they look like? Could they have any control over it? Now that's a really interesting question as well. It makes you wonder, are they shocked and they react with that sort of seeming fear because they're surprised that we are able to see them? Or is it because they're seeing a shadow person in their world? Very interesting. So that would be almost like the shadow person being a visitor, a conscious, intentional visitor who's trying to sneak around in our world, versus something that is in its own world doing its own thing, but occasionally encounters us. This is really, really bending my mind just wondering about this. Samantha says, time is circular, supposedly, so why not dimensions laying side by side and the circular motion slips? Just as we orbit the sun, we orbit an oval in an oval, so maybe the dimensions orbit in an oval and we occasionally overlap. Y'all are really blowing my mind right now. That is a concept I've never thought of before. The idea of alternate dimensions being in orbit of one another. I always thought of them sort of being layered one by one, on top of the other or side by side, but it's really in the context of considering the fact that we really don't know anything about that. It could be any relation to one another. I'm not even really educated in physics highly enough to postulate on this. So I love that you're thinking about it a lot more outside the box than even I've ever done. And I've put a lot of thought into this because of the fact that I have a novel I'm working on where multiple dimensions and their relation to one another comes into play. So it's very interesting that you would say that. It's kind of got me on a really different and new track of thinking. You just expanded my mind a little bit there, Samantha. I'm glad I chose you as a mod. So, I think we'll call it a day for that one. I hope you enjoyed these stories and the wonderful discussion afterward. So now I'm going to go to the live chat and select a choice code word. So, live listener Terico suggested the word selfie as the code word for today. If you are listening to this part of the story at the very end, this part of the video at the very end, type the word selfie into your comment down below so I can see who the real dreamers are. Take care, my friends. Special thanks to this week's Super Chat sponsors: Cindy, Terico, Lilah, Lorie, Zen, Samantha, Jessica B., and The Night Companion. Thank you all very much. All right. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and share. If you made it to the very end, you're exactly the kind of subscriber I'm looking for. Don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way, you can catch the live show and discuss the stories with me. Your input might even appear in my next video. Last thing, if you heard a code word after the story, type it in a comment down below so I know who the real dreamers are. Take care, my friend. Until next time.